So, hello and welcome back to another evening with Mr. Jules Verne as we journey along towards the center of the earth where things are definitely getting more fantastical the further we go. Not only have they discovered an underground ocean along with a forest made of mushrooms, which would be pretty at least. I've seen a lot of fantasy paintings of things like that, but they boarded their raft, which I still say a raft is not a seaworthy vessel. Even the Phoenicians, when they sailed all around way back in the way back when, they had outriggers and canoes, and I feel like they were a lot more set up. I don't think I would particularly want to go on a raft, especially not if we're going to discover dinosaurs that are getting into fights with giant waves coming off of them. No, not fun to me. But it does make a lot of fun to read. I hope everybody is doing good. It's yesterday we had sun, so much sun that it probably washed out all of the video. Like, I'm sure that video is not the best lit, but today the snow came back and it snowed all day. But I would say usually when it snows it's a little bit warmer, but that was not the case today because our high today was about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm ready for spring, so we're going to jump back in and go down underground where it's warmer in chapter 34 of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Wednesday, August 19th. Fortunately, the wind blows powerfully and has allowed us to flee quickly from the scene of the battle. Hans keeps his post at the helm. My uncle, drawn out of his absorbing reflections by the incidents of the combat, falls back into impatient contemplation of the ocean. Our voyage resumes its monotonous uniformity, which I would not like to break with a repetition of yesterday's danger. Thursday, August 20th. Unsteady wind at north-northeast, temperature high. We sail at a rate of 3.5 leagues per hour. At about noon, a distant noise can be heard. I note the fact here without being able to provide an explanation. It is a continuous roaring. In the distance, said the professor, there is a rock or an islet against which the sea is breaking. Hans climbed the mast, but he sees no breakers. The ocean is smooth all the way to the horizon. 3 hours go by. The roar seems to come from a distant waterfall. I point this out to my uncle, who shakes his head, but I'm convinced that I'm right. Are we then speeding towards some waterfall that will precipitate us into an abyss? This method of descent might possibly please the professor because it's almost vertical, but as for me, in any case, there must be some noisy phenomenon several leagues windward, for now the roar resounds with great intensity. Is it coming from the sky or the ocean? I look up at the steam suspended in the atmosphere and try to probe its depth. The sky is calm. The clouds, having floated to the top of the vault, seem motionless and they fade in the intense glare of the light. The cause of this phenomenon must therefore lie elsewhere. I then examine the clear horizon with no trace of mist. Its appearance has not changed. But if the noise comes from a waterfall, if this entire ocean crashes into a lower basin, if this roar is produced by a mass of falling water, The current should accelerate, and its increasing speed will give me the measure of the peril that threatens us. I check the current, but there is none. An empty bottle that I throw into the ocean stays in the direction of the wind. Around 4, Hans rises, grips the mast, and climbs to its top. From there, his gaze sweeps the partial circle of the ocean in front of the raft and stops at a point. His face expresses no surprise, but his eye remains at the point. "He's seen something," says my uncle. "I believe you're right," I said. Hans comes back down and then points with his arm to the south and says, "Dear near." "Down there," replies my uncle. Then, grabbing his telescope, he gazes for a minute, which seems to feel to me to last a century. "Yes, yes," he says. "What did you see?" I asked. "I see an immense fountain rising from the water." "Is it another sea creature?" "Perhaps." Then let's steer westward, because we know about the danger of running into prehistoric monsters." "Let's go straight," my uncle said. I turn to Hans, but he maintains the helm with inflexible rigor. "But if at our current distance from the animal, which is at least 12 leagues, we can see the fountain of water from its blowhole, it must be of supernatural size. Taking flight would be nothing more than following the rules of most elementary caution, but I guess we did not come here to be cautious." So we press on. The closer we draw, the taller the water fountain becomes. What monster can possibly fill itself with such a quantity of water and spurt it continuously? By 8 in the evening, we are less than 2 leagues away. Its blackish, enormous, mountainous body rests on the sea like an island. Is it imagination? Is it fear? Its length seems to exceed 1,000 fathoms. What can be this cetacean that neither Cuvier or Blumbach has ever anticipated? It lies motionless, as if asleep. The sea seems unable to lift it, and the waves play against its sides. The fountain of water, propelled to a height of 500 feet, falls back down in a rain of deafening noise. And here we are, speeding like madmen towards this powerful mass that 100 whales would not nourish even for a day. Terror grips me. I don't want to go any further. I will cut the halyard if necessary. I'm in open mutiny against the professor, who is not replying. Suddenly, Hans raises and points with his finger at the threatening object. "Holm," he says. "An island?" cries my uncle. "An island?" I say, shrugging my shoulders. "Obviously," the professor replies, and then breaks into a laugh. "What about the fountain of water?" I ask. "Geyser," says Hans. "Ah, undoubtedly a geyser," says my uncle. "A geyser like those in Iceland." At first, I refuse to admit that I've been so crudely mistaken, taking an island for a sea monster, but the evidence is against me, and I finally must acknowledge my error. It's nothing more than a natural phenomenon. As we get closer, the dimensions of the water column become quite magnificent. The island deceptively resembles an enormous whale whose head rests above the waters at a height of 6 fathoms. The geyser, a word the Icelanders pronounce geyser, and which means fury, raises majestically to its full height. Dull explosions take place from time to time, and the enormous jet, gripped by a more furious rage, shakes its plume of steam and leaps up to the first layer of clouds. It stands by itself. Neither steam vents nor hot springs are around it, and all the volcanic power gathers inside of it. Rays of electric light mingle with the dazzling fountain, every drop of which refracts all of its prismatic color. "Let's land," said the professor. "But we must carefully avoid the waterspout, which would sink our raft in a heartbeat." Hans, steering skillfully, takes us to the other end of the island. I jump out onto the rock, and my uncle follows me nimbly. Well, Hans remains at his post, like a man who is beyond amazement. We walk on granite, mixed with salacious turf. The ground is trembling under our feet, like the sides of an overheated boiler filled with steam struggling to get loose. The land is scalding hot. We come in sight of a small lake at the center, from which the geyser springs. I dip an overflow thermometer into the boiling water, and it indicates a temperature of 163 degrees Celsius. So, this water comes out of a burning furnace, which markedly contradicts Professor Lindenbrock's theories. I, of course, point this out. "Well," he tells me, "what does this prove against my doctrine?" "Nothing," I tell him, realizing that I'm up against inflexible obstinacy. Nevertheless, I'm forced to admit that we have so far enjoyed extraordinarily favorable circumstances, and that for some reason that eludes me, our journey takes place under special temperature conditions. But it seems quite obvious to me that one day we will reach the areas where the core heat reaches its highest limits and exceeds all the graduation in our thermometer. We shall see. That is what the professor says, who, after naming this volcanic island after his nephew, gives the signal to embark. I continue to contemplate the geyser for a few more minutes. I notice that its jet is variable in strength. Sometimes the intensity decreases and then returns with renewed vigor, which I attribute to the variable pressure of the steam that it has deep in its reservoir. At last we leave by steering around the very pointed rocks to the south. Hans took advantage of the stopover to fix up the raft a bit. But before we go any further, I make a few observations to calculate the distance that we have covered and note them in my journal. We have crossed 270 leagues of ocean since leaving Port Gräuben, and we are 620 leagues away from Iceland. We're now under England. And that is the end of chapter 34. You know, I don't actually blame Axel. After seeing a giant dinosaur fight the day before, I would probably immediately assume that they were sailing towards another giant dinosaur. So I don't blame him. But that would be the biggest creature ever known to anything in humankind. So probably a good thing it turned out to actually just be an island. Also, despite the fact that it was boiling hot, I would have tried to figure out some way to get that fresh water, because it does seem that the ocean that they're sailing on is salt water, and I'm just obsessed with the whole water issue. But we're going to see what happens next as we continue reading Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne with chapter 35. Friday, August 21st. The next day, the magnificent geyser has disappeared. The wind has become colder and has rapidly carried us away from Axel Island, and the roar gradually faded. The weather, if it is appropriate to call it that, will change before long. The atmosphere fills up with steam clouds that carry with them electricity generated by the evaporation of the salt water. The clouds sink perceptibly lower, and they all take on a uniform olive-colored hue. The electric rays scarcely can penetrate through this opaque curtain drawn on the theater in which the drama of a thunderstorm is about to be staged. I feel particularly affected, as do all creatures on Earth right before a cataclysm. The piled up cumulus clouds to the south look sinister. They have that merciless look that I've often noticed at the beginning of a thunderstorm, and the air is heavy, the sea calm. In the distance, the clouds resemble big bales of cotton piled up in picturesque disorder. By slow degrees, they dilate and lose in number what they gain in size. Their weight becomes such that they cannot lift from the horizon, but in the breeze of air currents up high, they dissolve bit by bit, grow darker, and soon combine into a single formidable-looking layer. From time to time, a ball of steam still lit up bounces off this grayish carpet and quickly loses itself in the opaque mass. The atmosphere is quite obviously saturated with liquid. I'm impregnated with it. My hair is bristling on my head as it would close to an electrical appliance. It seems to me that if my companions touched me right now, they would receive a powerful shock. At 10 in the morning, the symptoms of a storm become more pronounced, and it seems as if the wind lets up only to catch its breath. The cloud bank now resembles a huge goat skin in which hurricanes are building. I am reluctant to believe that the threatening signs from the sky are true, and yet I cannot help but say, "There's some bad weather coming on." My uncle gives no answer. He is in a murderous mood as he sees the ocean stretching out indefinitely before him. He just shrugs at my words. "We're gonna have a thunderstorm," I exclaim, pointing to the horizon. "Those clouds are coming down on the sea as if they were going to crush it." More silence. The wind stops, and nature looks as if it is dead and breathes no more. On the mast, where I already see a small St. Elmo's fire sprouting, the tensionless sail hangs in heavy folds. The raft, lying motionless in the middle of a sluggish sea with no waves. But if we are no longer moving, why leave the sail on the mast, which could wreck us at the first onslaught of the storm? "Let's reef the sail and take the mast down," I say. "That's much safer." "No, by the devil," my uncle shouts. "100 times no. Let the wind seize us. Let the thunderstorm take us away. But let me finally see the rocks of a shore, even if our raft were about to be smashed to smithereens." Those words are barely out of his mouth when a sudden change takes place on the southern horizon. The built-up steam condenses into water, and the air, violently attracted to the void produced by the condensation, turns into a hurricane. It rushes in from the farthest recesses of the cavern, and the darkness gets deeper. I can barely write a few incomprehensible notes here. The raft rises up and takes a leap as my uncle falls. I crawl to him. He is firmly gripped to the end of a thick rope and seems to watch the spectacle of unbridled elemental fury with pleasure. Hans, on the other hand, does not move. His long hair, blown by the hurricane and falling over his immobile face, gives him a strange look, because each of the ends of his hair is tipped with little luminous feathers. His face is that of a prehistoric man, a contemporary of the ichthyosaur and the megatherium. The mast, thankfully, holds firm yet. The sail stretches tight like a bubble about to burst. The raft is flying at a speed I cannot guess, but not as fast as the raindrops that it pushes aside down below itself in a straight, clear line of speed. The sail? The sail, I say, motioning for someone to lower it. No, says my uncle. Nedge, says Hans, gently shaking his head. But now the rain is like a roaring waterfall in front of the horizon towards which we're speeding like madmen. But before it reaches us, the veil of clouds breaks apart, the sea begins to boil, and the electricity produced by a powerful chemical reaction in the upper layers comes into play. Glittering flashes of lightning mix with crashes of thunder. Innumerable flashes interlace in the midst of detonations, and the mass of steam glows white hot. Hailstones light up as they hit the metal of our tools and our weapons, and the heaving waves resemble fire-breathing hills, each one belching forth its own interior flame, and every crest plumed with dancing fire. My eyes are blinded by this dazzling light, my ears stunned by the roar of thunder. I have to hold on to the mast, which is bending like a reed under the violence of this hurricane. Here my notes become quite incomplete. I have only been able to add a few quick observations, jotted down mechanically, so to speak. But their brevity and their obscurity are saturated with the emotion that was gripping me then, and they convey the gist of the situation much better than my memory. Saturday, August 23rd. Where are we? Driven on at incalculable speed, the night has been horrible. The thunderstorm does not abate. We live in the midst of noise, constant explosion. Our ears are bleeding, and we cannot exchange a word. The lightning flashes never stop. I see reverse zigzags that, after flashing momentarily, rebound back up and strike against the granite vault. What if it crumbles? Other lightning flashes bifurcate or take the shape of fiery spheres that explode like bombshells, but the general noise does not seem to increase whenever they do. It has exceeded the volume that the human ear can perceive, and even if all the powder kegs of the world exploded at once, we just would not hear it anymore. There is continuous light emission at the surface of the clouds. The electric substance is constantly discharged from their molecules. Obviously, the gaseous principles in the air have charged innumerable fountains of water that rush up into the air and fall back down again, foaming. Where are we going? My uncle lies stretched out at the end of the raft. The heat continues to increase. I look at the thermometer and it indicates... Here my notes are obliterated. Monday, August 24th. It will never end. Why would the state of this very dense atmosphere, now that it's been charged, not be definitive? We're worn with exhaustion. Hans, as usual. The raft speeds invariably to the southeast. We've run 200 leagues since leaving Axel Island. At noon, the violence of the storm doubles. We must safely stow every piece of cargo, and each of us ties himself down as well. The waves are above our heads. Impossible to address a single word to each other for the last 3 days. We open our mouths, we move our lips, but no sound comes forth. Even talking into each other's ears, we can't hear each other. My uncle approached me. He uttered a few words. I believe he has told me we're lost, but I'm not sure. I decide to write down a few words. Let us lower the sail. He nodded yes. Scarcely has he risen up again when a disk of fire appears at the edge of the raft. Our mast and sail are swept away together in one stroke, and I see them fly up to a prodigious height, looking like a pterodactyl, that fantastic bird of the first ages. We're frozen with fear. The half-white, half-blue ball, as large as a 10-inch bombshell, moves around slowly, but revolves with surprising speed under the whiplash of the hurricane. It goes here and there. It climbs up onto one of the raft's crossbeams, jumps onto our sack of provisions, and comes back down, leaps and skirts along the box of gunpowder. Horror. Are we going to blow up? No. The dazzling disc moves away. It seems to approach Hans, who looks at it steadily. It approaches my uncle, who falls down on his knees to avoid it. It approaches me, pale and trembling in the glare of the light and heat. It spins near my foot, which I try to pull back but cannot. The smell of laughing gas has filled the air, entering the throat, the lungs. We're going to suffocate? Why can I not pull back my foot? It must be riveted to the planks. The descent of this electric sphere has magnetized all of the iron on board. Instruments, tools, weapons, all of them move around and clash with a sharp jangle. The nails in my shoes cling tenaciously to a plate of iron set into our wood, and I can't move my foot away. Finally, I rip it away with a violent effort just when the ball was about to seize my foot in its gyration and drag me away with it. What glaring light. The sphere bursts, and we are covered in tongues of fire. Then all the light goes out. I had the time to see my uncle stretched out on the raft, Hans still at the helm and spitting fire under the impact of the electricity penetrating him. Where are we going? Where are we going? Tuesday, August 25th. I come out of a long spell of unconsciousness. The thunderstorm continues. The lightning flashes tear loose like a brood of snakes released in the atmosphere. Are we still on the sea? Yes, we are, and driven at incalculable speed. We've passed under England, under the Channel, under France, under all of Europe, perhaps, but a new noise can now be heard. Obviously, it's the noise of waves breaking on rocks, but then... And that is the end of chapter 35. I think I'm going to grab a drink, and we're going to make this a triple, because I want to see what happens next. I hate such a big cliffhanger, especially before my night off. So give me a second, and I'll be right back. Okay, time to see what's going to happen to our intrepid crew after being caught in a electrical hurricane, which sounds utterly terrifying. We're going to finish off tonight with chapter 36 of Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. Here ends what I have called my ship's log, happily saved from the wreckage, and I will resume my narrative as before. What happened when the raft was dashed on the reefs of the shore, I cannot tell you. I felt myself being hurled into the waves, and if I escaped from death, if my body was not torn on the sharp rocks, it was because Hans's powerful arm pulled me out of the abyss. The courageous Icelander carried me out of the reach of the waves to a burning sand where I found myself side by side with my uncle. Then he returned to the rocks against which the furious waves were beating to save a few bits from the shipwreck. I was unable to speak. I was shattered by emotion and fatigue, and it took me a long hour to recover. In the meantime, a deluge of rain was still falling, but with the increased intensity that precedes the end of a thunderstorm. A few rocks overhead afforded us shelter from the torrents falling from the sky. Hans made some food which I could not touch, and each of us, exhausted by 3 sleepless nights, fell into a pained sleep. The next day, the weather was splendid. The sky and the ocean had calmed down in perfect synchrony. Any trace of the tempest had disappeared. The professor's joyful words greeted my awakening. His good cheer was utterly terrible. "Well, my boy," he said, "have you slept well?" Would not one have thought that we were still in the house on Kongstrasse, that I was coming down for breakfast and about to be married to poor Gräuben? Alas, if the tempest had only driven the raft to the east, we would have passed under Germany, under my beloved Hamburg, under the very street where everything I loved in this world dwelled. Then, just under 40 leagues would have separated me. But they were 40 vertical leagues of granite, and in reality, we were at least 1,000 leagues apart. All of this painfully crossed my mind before I answered my uncle's question. "Well, now," he said, "won't you tell me whether you slept good?" "Very well," I said. "I still feel shattered, but it'll soon turn to nothing." "Absolutely nothing, Axel. A bit of fatigue, that's all." "You seem very cheerful this morning, Uncle." "Delighted, my boy, I'm delighted. We've arrived." "At the goal of our expedition?" "No, at the end of that unending ocean. Now we'll travel on land again and really get down into the bowels of the globe." "Uncle, allow me to ask you a question." "Of course, Axel." "How are we to return?" "Return? Ah, you think about returning before we've even arrived." "No, I just want to know how we'll do it." "In the simplest way. Once we've reached the center of the globe, we'll either find a new route to go back to the surface, or we'll just return the way we came like ordinary people. I'd like to think that it won't have closed off behind us." "But we'll have to repair our raft." "Of course." "And food supplies? Do we have enough left to accomplish all of these great things?" "Why, yes, certainly. Hans is a skilled fellow, and I'm sure that he has saved a large part of our cargo. Let's go make sure." We left this grotto, which was open to every wind. I cherished a hope that was also a fear. It seemed impossible to me that the terrible wreckage of the raft would not have destroyed everything on board, but I was wrong. When I arrived on the shore, I found Hans in the midst of a multitude of items, all arranged in order. My uncle shook hands with him in an expression of deepest gratitude. This man, with a superhuman devotion that might have no equal, had worked while we slept and saved the most precious items at great risk to life and limb. It's not that we had not suffered losses, our firearms, for instance, but we could do without them. Our stock of powder had remained intact after having almost blown us up during the tempest. Well, said the professor, since we have no guns, we won't have to bother with hunting. Fine, I said. But the instruments? Well, here's our manometer, the most useful of them all, for which I would have exchanged all of the others. With this, I can calculate the depth so as to know when we've reached the center of the earth. Without it, we risk going beyond it and re-emerging in Australia. His cheerfulness was almost ferocious. Our compass? I asked. Here it is, on this rock, in perfect condition, and as well the thermometer and the chronometer. Ah, Hans is an invaluable man. There was no denying that. As far as instruments, nothing was missing. As for tools and devices, I could see ladders, ropes, pickaxes, etc., lying about in the sand. Still, there was the question of food to investigate. And the food, I said. The boxes that contained it were lined up on the gravel, perfectly preserved. For the most part, the sea had spared them, and what with biscuits, salted meat, gin, and dried fish, we still had at least a 4-month supply. 4 months, said the professor. We have time to go and return, and with what's left, I'll give a grand dinner for all of my colleagues. You would think I would have been used to my uncle's temperament, but he never ceased to amaze me. Now, he said, we'll replenish our supply of fresh water with the rain that the storm has left in all of these granite basins. That way, we'll have no reason to fear being overcome by thirst. As for the raft, I will recommend to Hans to do his best to repair it, although I don't expect it'll be of any further use to us. How so? I asked. An idea of my own, my boy. I don't think that we're going to go out where we came in. I looked at the professor with a bit of mistrust. I wondered if he had gone mad, and yet he would turn out to be right. Let's go get breakfast. I followed him to an elevated promontory after he had given his instructions to Hans. Dried meat, biscuits, and tea made us an excellent meal, one of the best that I'll admit I've ever had in my life. Hunger, fresh air, calm weather after all of the storm, all contributed to my appetite. During breakfast, I asked my uncle where we were now. That seems quite difficult to calculate, I told him. Difficult to calculate exactly? Yes, he said. Impossible, actually, since during those 3 days of storm, I've not been able to keep track of the speed or the direction of the raft, but we can still make an approximate estimate. In fact, we made our last observation on the island with the geyser. That's Axel Island, my boy. Don't reject the honor of having given your name to the very first island ever discovered in the interior of the earth. Fine. On Axel Island, I said. Back there, we had covered 270 leagues of ocean. We were 600 leagues away from Iceland. Good, he said. Let's start from that point then, and count 4 days of storm, during which our speed could not have been less than 80 leagues for every 24 hours. Fine. So that would be another 300 leagues. Yes. And so the Lindenbrock Sea would be about 600 leagues from shore to shore. Do you realize, Axel, it competes in size with the Mediterranean? Yes, especially if we haven't crossed all of it, which is quite possible. Curiously, I added, if our calculations are accurate, we should now have the Mediterranean right above our heads. Really? Really. Since we're 900 leagues away from where we started. That's a nice long way, my boy. But whether we're under the Mediterranean rather than under Turkey or the Atlantic depends on whether our direction has changed. No, I said, the wind seems steady. So I would think that this shore should be southeast of Port Gräuben. Well, we can make sure of that, my boy, by consulting the compass. Let's go see what it says. The professor went towards the rock where Hans had put our instruments. He was cheerful and lively. He rubbed his hands and posed. He was acting like a young man. I followed him, rather curious to know if I wasn't mistaken. When we reached the rock, my uncle took the compass, placed it horizontally, and observed the needle, which after a few oscillations stopped in a fixed position due to magnetic attraction. My uncle looked, then rubbed his eyes, and then looked again. Finally, he turned to me, thunderstruck. What's wrong? He motioned for me to look at the instrument. An exclamation of surprise burst from me. The tip of the needle indicated north, where we assumed south to be. It pointed to the shore instead of the sea. I shook the compass. I examined it. It was perfect. No matter in what position we placed the needle, it returned to this unexpected direction. Therefore, there could be no doubt. During the storm, the wind had changed without us noticing, and it had taken our raft right back to the shore that my uncle had thought he was leaving behind. And that is the end of chapter 36, and where we are going to end it tonight. I kind of feel for the professor. He's a little bit, we'll say, single-minded, but that's gotta be just an utter dashing of your hopes to think that you've hit the other side and you're gonna go and your adventure's gonna continue, and then to find out that no, you're just right back where you started from. I think he's going to be in a foul mood when we rejoin him on Saturday. So thank you, as always, for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that triple header with 3 more chapters. Why not? This one was a lot longer. Sorry about that. But yeah, no reading tomorrow night because tomorrow night is my live stream night. You can join me if you want. I live stream every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And we usually just play The Sims, where I am dealing with a very stubborn Sim who is not listening to me. So, thank you, and I will see you next time.